So we left off where Joseph had revealed himself to his brothers. And when the Pharaoh got the report that Joseph's brothers have come, the Pharaoh, he was pleased. He was very happy and said to Joseph to say to his brothers, he said, load your animals and depart and go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. And so we saw that the brothers did according to what his brother had told them through the Pharaoh that he commanded. And they made their way back to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. Now, remember, this was a long trip for them going back after all the truth that's been revealed to them. And they were trying to figure out how this all happened. But Joseph also told them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. This was a glorious time. This was a time for reunion. This was a time of joy. Not to fight, but joy. So they told their father Jacob, Joseph is still alive, and he's governor over all the land of Egypt. And if you remember, Jacob's heart stood still when he heard that, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. In other words, he just came full of life. Then Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So Jacob and his family would make their way towards Egypt to Joseph. And one thing that we're going to learn in this chapter that we're going to see from our patriarch Jacob is that he does exactly a repetition that we've seen throughout Genesis that follows us to this point. This maturity that happens in the Christian, like in Abraham and his father Isaac, all right, where they are obedient to God, and through faith they seek God's wisdom before they did anything. And that's what we're going to see in chapter 46, verse 1. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is where Israel's grandfather Abraham planted that tamarisk tree that, remember, was that medicinal tree. And he called on the name of the Lord there, the everlasting God, in Genesis chapter 21. And this was also the place Isaac received a special promise from God, and he built an altar of sacrifice there as well, also calling on the name of the Lord in Genesis chapter 26. And so now Israel, or Jacob, makes his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba, and, look at verse 1, offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So Israel stops here in Beersheba to honor God with sacrifices at the very same place, which is awesome, I think. I'm like, wow, that's cool. All three patriarchs worshipped in that area and called on the name of the Lord. And Beersheba was in the most southern part of Canaan, which means although Jacob took his family from Hebron, he made his way to Beersheba, which is the southern part, right? It means that Jacob did not leave Canaan without God's assurance. It would be more than 40 years before when Jacob was about to leave the promised land of Canaan, where God met him in a dream at Bethel as he headed to Paddan Aram to his uncle Laban's, right, Rebekah's brother. That right there in Bethel was Jacob's first encounter with God. So now history kind of comes full circle. God met Jacob in Bethel, and here we have Jacob seeking God, calling on the name of the Lord about whether he should leave the promised land, right? Because he didn't want to do anything outside of God's will. He wanted God's permission before he stepped foot off the land of Canaan. And so God, who was faithful, meets with Jacob in a vision to answer a couple of things that was concerning Jacob about going. First, is it safe for the family to go to Egypt? Or are they going to go there and get slaughtered? Were they to remain in the promised land under his protection. And second, Jacob was concerned that when they go, will they be absorbed by the Egyptians, a Gentile nation? And these are valid concerns. Because even the culture of Canaan, if you remember, when they were influenced by the city where their daughter was taken and taken advantage of. But the culture of Canaan was starting to kind of influence the sons more than anything. And so Jacob was concerned also for the greater promise concerning the bloodline, speaking for generations that were beyond his life. He knew he was older and that eventually, he would go, pass away. So he wondered if by going to Egypt, will they be absorbed by the Egyptians, and will they lose the bloodline promises and throw away the hope of the promised one, which God had planned? Let's talk about some big valid concerns, right, that he had. And Jacob, he will not move forward with this important decision until it is God who leads him directly in his will. Now, I want us to think about this. For Jacob, these concerns for the family and the bloodline are seen by him as more important than seeing his son Joseph again face to face. Now, weigh that out. He hadn't seen Joseph for over 22 years. He thought he was dead all this whole time, right? And now he has the opportunity to go see him. But then he's got the bloodline and the family on the other hand, and God's will in the midst of it all. And for some of us, we wouldn't hesitate. If it was my own son to go see my son again under that same circumstance, I'd be like, let's go. Let's go. I want to see my son. But for Jacob, we see how mature he has become in his relationship with God. That even though he really desires to see his son Joseph and bring his family to safety, God's will is what was completely governing his life. God's will had complete authority over his life. And something like this, where you are moving not just yourself, but your whole entire family, which is his entire bloodline, to Egypt, is and should be important to Jacob. So Jacob is not going to move any further at this point from where God has placed him in Canaan. He was going to be obedient and stay there until God tells him it's time for him to move. And this is what we have seen through Abraham and Isaac as they matured as Christians to be obedient and to stay in the land that God has called them to be in. So through faith and prayer, Jacob, he seeks God. He's calling on the name of the Lord because he needs to hear from God above all. I think there's that time between Hebron and Canaan when he started to reflect on all this, where the Lord starts to reveal things in his life where he says, you know what? I'm going to make sure that I am in God's will in this before I move any further. But you got to think too, an invitation from the Pharaoh and from his son Jacob, that's pretty amazing. And as much as Jacob may respect the Pharaoh and how much he longs to see Joseph, whom he loves, and as big of an adore that this is, and that it may look like, the Pharaoh, my son, are not God. The Pharaoh and his son is not God. That may be a big open door, but he had to put it in context that he would not be tempted to move to Egypt out of his own will, out of his own flesh. But his will is to do as God's will. And I love it. Verse 2, then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. He calls him by name. Isn't it amazing how personal of a relationship we have with God, that he knows us by our name? So Jacob responded and said, here I am. And I love this response. He came to Beersheba seeking the Lord's will, offering sacrifice and spending as much time he needs to listen for God's direction. And when God called, Jacob responds, here I am. I'm ready to listen. I'm here to hear what you will for me to do. And Jacob responds as soon as the Lord called him. Think about that. As soon as the Lord called him, he responds. What we need to see is Jacob drew close to the Lord. He was seeking him. He had a persistent heart to search out God's will in this. He had brought all his concerns to the Lord in prayer and remained in this place of worship and in prayer, and then the Lord responded. When we bring our needs to the Lord, sometimes we tend to pray for our needs, and then we immediately start looking for the signs or the open doors. And then when we get impatient, we go back into prayer and start praying for the same things. And once we're done praying real quick, we go and we start looking for the signs or the open doors. Kind of like touch and goes in the Navy. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But when a jet is starting to land, you have the carrier sitting right here. This jet will it'll land and then get enough speed and take off again. It's what we call touch and goes. And that's, sometimes we tend to be quick, with our prayers. We touch, we get down, Lord, here's what I'm dealing with. But then we take off looking for the signs and wondering, where's the open door? Where do I fly to kind of thing with such speed? And sometimes, we pray about our situations like that. Go quickly to God and go on about our life looking for the answer. We touch God in prayer, and then we go looking for the quick door. And I think we've all done that at some point in our relationship with the Lord. I know I have. And sometimes an open door can come. And as good as it may be, sometimes it's so good to be true. You're like, oh, it has to be God. We tend to go walk right in that door when God's will is not in it. And that's a bad situation. We've seen before, it was when Isaac had sent his helper. Remember that? When he sent his helper to go find the bride for Isaac? And there was a specific thing he prayed for, and then he waited out until he fed every one of the horses with the water. All the animals to drink, right? He wouldn't, once he saw everything play right, it seemed like, oh, she's the one. But what we learned from the helper is that he patiently waited until she completely did exactly what was supposed to happen. And I think that's a great lesson for us to learn even when it comes to these decisions. We tend to think that, oh, this may be it, but no, that's a good time to go back into prayer. Because we have an enemy out there. And he would like nothing more than you to walk into the wrong door than what the door that God has prepared for you. But what I love is Jacob shows us that he made this time to remain in a heart of worship and in a heart of prayer. His time was devoted for sacrifice. Now, that takes some planning, takes some time to do. But his mind was set, look, this time is for the Lord. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to give him my full attention, seeking him, listening for him, and I will not continue to Egypt until the Lord gives me his will in this. If he tells them to go. And the thing what I liked about it too is that he did make his way to Beersheba. So he was prepared to go if God willed it. And there's nothing wrong with being prepared when you're seeking the Lord, for that next step. The Lord is already working. You see it. You're praying about it. You don't have that answer, but it's good to be ready. It's good, like you guys, it's good to be packed and ready to go. When that door opens, God will open that door and you're ready. And that's what I see with Jacob. They were ready and prepared. But he was also ready and prepared not to go if the Lord said no, if that door was shut. So he never left Canaan. He was prepared to stay as well. So we see Jacob didn't move any further until the Lord will answer him. He remained in a heart of worship and prayer, and sometimes that is exactly what we need to do when seeking God through big decisions. Make that time for God. Patiently wait to hear his voice speak to you, however he speaks to you, but you give him time, because just as God begins to answer Jacob in a vision, God will answer you as well in time. So God called for Jacob. Jacob said, here I am. In verse 3, he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. So obviously, we see that Jacob had fears about going to Egypt. God said, don't fear. I am God, and this is my will, and this is what I'm going to do. He says, for I will make of you a great nation there. So the door is open for you to go to Egypt. It is the door that I have opened. So that tells you that he's already confirming, this is my door. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. I will make you a great nation there. Okay, so he's confirming that. He goes, the nation of Israel. So right now, to keep this in context, the family right now total to about, and I'll include Joseph and his two sons, but about 70 people. We're talking 70 males, okay, all together. And just so you see what God means by I will make you a great nation, when God brings the nation of Israel out of Egypt in about 400 years, and he protects them within Egypt and protects the bloodline, when he brings them out, God will be bringing about 600,000 young men over the age of 20, not including with the women and the children. All right? They will come out of that nation with a number of about 1.5 to 2 million. So God has them going to Egypt. He's going to protect them and grow this small group, this small family, into becoming a great nation in size, big enough in size to conquer and to occupy the promised land in Canaan, which will also belong to Israel. So this is what God is working on. And God says, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. I will make you a great nation there. And now God gives Israel 3 promises. First is, I will go down with you to Egypt. I will be with you. There's nothing better than being in God's will, knowing that he is with you in that will. There is nothing better than that. If you're going down another door that you think it's his because you didn't take the time to pray, he's watching you. He'll be with you, but I think he's working on getting you back close to where he wanted you in the first place. But when you know it is his will, he will give you his peace. And there's nothing like that peace when you're walking in his will. So he tells them, I will go down with you to Egypt. You're not going to be alone. I will be with you. Where have we heard this before? Throughout Genesis, right? Through Abraham, I will be with you. I will be with you. And we're seeing it here through this patriarch. And he goes, and I will also surely bring you up again. Meaning you will be there for a time, but I will bring you up again, back to the land of promise. Remember, God had said this to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, saying, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possession. So he's letting them know that there will be this time that you will be there, and surely I'll bring you up again. So he reiterates this to Jacob to let him know that this whole plan doesn't end with them in Egypt, but that I will surely bring you up again to the promised land. And notice it says, with great possessions, and we know how that story goes, and eventually we'll get there, Lord willing. And Joseph will put his hands on your eyes. So there's that third promise, meaning you will make it to Egypt, you will be there with Joseph, and on the day that you're on your deathbed, your son Joseph will be with you in the final hours of your life. And he will put his hands on your eyes to close them when you are gone. And to me, this is a beautiful comfort. There's comfort in that, knowing that he's about to spend his last minutes with the son that he has lost so much time with, who he has mourned over for 20 years. And Israel or Jacob will live in Egypt, though, for another 17 years when he gets there. It's pretty amazing. With all his boys together before he dies, it'll be another 17 years. But this is a beautiful promise from God to him. And when God answers, his will always comes with his peace, like I said before. There's always this sense of peace when he answers to boldly go to Egypt. And there is something about God's peace when he answers you through prayer that allows you to walk boldly in his will, confident in God. And it's all in God, if you've ever noticed that. He's given you the peace, you feel the open door, and that boldness to walk and step in his will is 100% confident in God, knowing that he's with you, right? So God has given Jacob his will. In verse 5, it says, Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones and their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. So with the entire family, Jacob goes down to Egypt. Now in verses 8 through 25, we're going to see a listing of all these men who were heads of different sections of the family as they traveled down with him. So verse 8, it says, Now these were the names of the children of Israel, Jacob and his sons, who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn, and his descendants, the sons of Reuben, were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. And the next son, the sons of Simeon, were Jemuel, Jaman, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of the Canaanite woman. And then the third son, the son Levi, were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Then the fourth son, the sons of Judah, were Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Then the fifth son, the sons of Issachar, were Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shimron. And then the sixth son, the sons of Zebulun, were Sered, Elon, and Jachleel. Verse 15, it says, Then these were the sons of Leia, whom she bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, with his daughter Dinah. All the persons, his sons and his daughter, were 33. So we're talking about all the sons that he had with Leia. There now then in verses 16 through 18, we will see the descendants of Ziplah. Now, if you remember back when they were having these baby wars so much between, it was Leah and Rachel hadn't had her child yet, but then they started bringing in their concubines, or their maidservants in, and Jacob would end up having children through the concubines. So that's what we're going to see through 16 through 18, the descendants of Ziplah, who was the concubine of Jacob through Leah. It says, The sons of Gad were Ziphion, Haggai, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Aradi, and Ereli. Verse 17, the sons of Asher were Jimnah, Ishuah, Isua, Beriah, and Sarah, their sister. And the sons of Beri were Heber and Malkiel. So, verse 18, these were the sons of Ziplah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. Now we have the sons of Rachel, who Jacob loved, and their descendants from verses 19 through 22. It says, the sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, were Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. The sons of Benjamin were Bela, Beshur, Ashbel, Gira, Nahaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. That's funny. You like to have two sons. Hey, there's Mupin and Hupin. Come on, come with me. Go take the trash out. It's like Humpty and Dumpty. Mupin and Humpin. These were the sons. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. And now we have Rachel's servant Bilhah, who became a concubine of Jacob. And her sons in verses 23 and 25 says, the son of Dan was Hushim. The sons of Naphtali were Jahaziel, Guni, Jezir, and Shilem. These were the sons of Bilhah, who Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter, and she bore these to Jacob. 7 persons in all. All the persons who went with Jacob, not including Jacob, to Egypt, who came from his body besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. So here we have the 66, not including Jacob, right? And when you add Jacob and Joseph with his 2 sons, that makes 70. So 70 in all males were now in Egypt. It's a pretty good-sized family. And after 400 years, God will take this family and bring them out of Egypt as a great nation. It's like a miracle. It's almost just absolutely amazing how God orchestrated this whole thing for the nation of Israel. Verse 28. Then he, meaning Jacob, sent Judah before him to Joseph. So Reuben, when you look at this verse, Reuben has been kind of removed along with Simeon and Levi of the duties usually handled by the first son. And it usually trickles down. So we see that Judah is the one to take care of the important things, and he sends him before Joseph to greet him. And for Joseph to basically, as it says here in the verse, to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. And when Joseph learns that they have made it there to the land and getting settled in, it says in verse 29 that so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. What a reunion. Reminds me of when we watch those little clips and we see a little child being surprised by their military parent that they hadn't seen for a long time because of the deployment. They realize when they look in their eyes that it's really them. And they grab them with tears of joy, missing them for so long. For Joseph and Jacob, it has been 22 years. And Joseph, like that 17-year-old boy, he presents himself to his dad. After all he had been through, and he fell on his neck with a huge hug and cried and wept like a little boy. And Jacob, who had lost his son, who he had thought was dead for so many years, is filled with joy holding his son again in love and never wanting to let go. I know a lot of us fathers, when we haven't seen our kids just for a short time, we just want to grab hold of them and just hug them. Like right now, my son in Albuquerque, I miss him so much. And my daughter, even down in Florida, I miss her so much. There must have been this release in the heart of Jacob in this moment. That feeling of guilt, of being responsible for his death, seeing him with his own 2 eyes at this very moment. He's holding his son in his arms, had to be absolutely just amazing. So they held on and wept a good while. I can't even imagine how long before they let go. This was something also that neither one of them ever thought in their life they will ever get to do again. Verse 30, and Israel said to Joseph, now let me die since I've seen your face because you're still alive. Meaning his life is full. Since I've seen your face and you're still alive, his life has been made complete now. It's like, now I can die. Now let me die, Then Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls on you and asks, what is your occupation? So apparently, one of the first things the Pharaoh asks is, so what do you do for a living? And I guess we Americans must have gotten that from Pharaoh because that's something that we ask all the time. Once we get past the name, hey, what's your name? Yeah, so what do you do? What do you do for a living, right? But in the Middle East, this would be more insulting to them to ask what their occupation is because we tend to think that we know a lot about that person based off what they do. We get the whole picture just by their occupation. But in the Middle East, if you want to know about that someone, they will tell you about their father or their family. That is their identity, their character, their everything is in their family bloodline. What they do for a living does not identify who they are. Boy, can we learn from that. What we do does not identify who we are. It took me a long time after I retired from the Navy to get that plugged into my mind. The Lord had to do a big work there. But for us, though, it's typically about what we do. It's the Western culture. We ask, so what do you do? So Joseph is saying, when the Pharaoh asks you, what is your occupation? Verse 34, you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now. Both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Pretty interesting. So what Joseph does here it's absolutely genius when you think about it. And I'm sure his father Jacob would appreciate this thought process, and here's why. Now, Egypt was a very wicked place, sort of what was the representation of the world of that time, or how we call the world. They were very wicked, and they practiced evil. And being that Joseph was viewed by them kind of like kin, they loved Joseph, and so did the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh would want to find out exactly what they did so he can find a place for them to work in his kingdom, in his palace, which would cause the family to be absorbed by the Egyptians. So in order to protect his family from being absorbed, Joseph told them that they should reply to the Pharaoh that you are shepherds of livestock, meaning keepers of cattle, right? And of course, they did have sheep and other animals as well, because the Egyptians saw some of that livestock, mainly sheep, as unclean. Like they're unclean animals. And the Egyptians were mainly known for crops. They were farmers, and they dealt a lot with crops. They didn't deal a lot with the livestock as much. But they would look at shepherds as an abomination, meaning they loathed the shepherds. They were repulsed by the shepherds because they handled the animals, and most of them also handled the sheep. And they just grouped them all together. So this was brilliant for the family because this would keep them from ever being absorbed by the Egyptians. That was one of his big concerns, right? Especially putting the family in an urban area to do it. And this thought process would keep Israel from ever being absorbed by Egypt, because they wouldn't want anything to do with them. It's like, no, you guys stay over there. You're cool. We don't want you over here. We don't want us to mix with you guys. You're unclean. So he sends them to the land of Goshen, where they are left unbothered under the protection of God, and they never were taken in by the Egyptian culture. So this shows us that Joseph made sure his family was protected, and that they had a land that was plenty, and that they would never be absorbed by the Egyptians, and so that God's plan would not be lost and swallowed up in history in Egypt. Sharp man. Joseph was really smart. And to me, this is just an absolute beautiful reunion, an awesome happy ending. I like happy endings. Do y'all like happy endings? It's great to watch movies and you're just like, oh, that's so good, right? And then yet another thought came to my mind. In the 17 years that Jacob was alive in Egypt, after he arrived, he must have been remembering that time when Joseph shared his dream to the family. I almost wonder if they even talked about it, where Jacob rebuked Joseph. Remember that? When he said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And then we read, and his brothers envied him, right? But it says, but his father kept the matter in mind. So that had never, from that time when he was telling those dreams, that had to have just kind of puzzled him. God, why did you give him this dream? Was it from you? And then here he is back, reunited with his son, and yet all of them probably would end up bowing before him because, he's in a respected position. He still has to pay his respects to him just like anybody else. But I think seeing the dream come full circle may have put Jacob's heart in awe of God and how all these things came together. I know when the Lord does a work in my life, and this is the reason why I was putting this out, where you see him and all things coming together, it might not make sense even in the midst of as it's happening, but when you reflect back, it always makes perfect sense. Just to put us in awe of him, where we grow firm and strong in the Lord. And it always comes in perfect timing where we are at in our lives. We may not always understand the no's or the trials or the tribulations. Joseph may not understood everything he was dealing with while he was in prison. But it all made sense at this point now where they can look back and say, Lord, now I understand why and how this all had to happen. I understand why I had to learn the language. I understood why I had to remain faithful even in the midst of the most unfavorable circumstances in order to get to this place by your favor to do this work and to bring the family into Egypt during the famines. Those are those chapters in our own lives that have happy endings where we can always look back and, from that glory to glory to glory. So whatever it is that you are going through now, whatever is the obstacle that doesn't make sense in front of you right now, spend time seeking the Lord. Go to Beersheba. Make that time when you think of, hey, I need to make time specifically for God, and I'm not going to move until I feel like the Lord has given me something, whether it's just the simple trust in me, I'm with you. If he reiterates that in your life through, you're reading scriptures and that comes at you, just spend time in a heart of worship and in a heart of prayer and listen for him and let him answer you. Because he will. He will answer you according to his will when you're seeking his will, right? When you dealt with ask and it shall be given to you, it's ask according to his will, and these things will be added onto you. It's not ask for that Bentley to pull up, mysteriously in your front yard, but it's whatever it is that aligns in his will, he will answer you. And he will answer according to his will, and that's exactly ultimately where we want to be found, period, is in his will. And then all things will make sense. Amen? Amen. All right, well, let us pray.